Hello, hello. Thank you for coming back to this, the last part of Hidden in Plain Sight by the Ethical Skeptic, a reading and commentary by me here on Fringe Index. The last video actually misspoke. I was looking at the scroll bar here and kind of thought we were only halfway through the article, but actually most of the remainder is footnotes in the comment section of this page. So we are actually here on the last section. So in this video, we're going to go ahead and wrap up. And it's, man, some pretty wild stuff. So I'm just gonna get into it here. We're gonna wrap on some of the geological evidence, and then it's gonna go into the famous Nubian ostrich egg as a potential calendar for this cyclical oceanic displacement, as the ethical skeptic calls it. So let's continue. So let's say here, this argument is further supported by geomorphological evidence across North Africa, extending to the Atlantic coast of Mauritania. Below, one can observe the mega-scours left by this event, which occurred less than 14,000 years ago. These scour channels, carved into the limestone bedrock, directly challenge the notion that wind alone was responsible for their formation. The geomorphological features, Mega-Scours channels, diatomaceous salt deposits in the absence of precipitation formed tributaries, strongly suggest that these formations were not the result of long-term wind erosion or traditional fluvial processes. Instead, they align with a catastrophic high-energy water event, which this hypothesis attributes to a violent inundation from the Mediterranean Sea. Average overall depth, 4,900 feet. Salient depth, 5,000 to 9,000 feet. At centroid of displacement. I hope this car alarm that's going off in the background is not coming through this mic. I am about to lose my mind. I'm about to take a golf club to somebody's car out there. I digress. So if you hear a car alarm, sorry. Hopefully it's not too distracting. Definitely is to me. All right. Blah, 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 blah. Okay, there's like this diagram here. Like if you go look at like Google Earth, or like Google Earth, let's take just a quick little gander here. You know, this is something I think anybody that looks at Africa ends up wondering about, right? It's like, look at all these just lines, okay? Like all over the place. This does not look like the wind. This does not look like the wind. Okay? This maybe kind of looks like the wind, but you know what? Not really. It doesn't really look like the wind either. And I know I'm a lay person, and, you know, I'm supposed to believe this is just like wind and just regular erosion. No. I think any person with an inkling of experience in the world can look at this and tell, at the very least, what it's not. Maybe not exactly what it is, but definitely what it's not. And if you go and look in North America, it's kind of the same thing. Like, just a bunch of big-ass lines all over the place. And, you know, especially over here, though, boy, it sure does look like a whole bunch of water washed over this and scoured the landscape clean. They say there's evidence that this was once a very green, lush environment, which would make sense. And then when you get a big event, it just scours it away. I don't think it really even makes sense that it sort of gradually turned into a desert either. That doesn't seem very likely. I mean, like green areas like resist desertification. Like they're like a huge buffer against it. They trap moisture, trap soil. If I look over here, it's the same thing. And so that's what he said in the last video, if you remember, the last section, that this whole region of Saudi Arabia, if you look at the elevation, it all makes sense that if the ocean was higher here, it would have filled in this region, and then these lines are where over time the ocean subsided and went back and down to where it currently is located over here. Anyway, let's get back to the article. Accordingly, our hypothesis finds a successful prediction in this regard, courtesy of Jimmy Corsetti, Joe Rogan Experience, episode 1928. This is when he was, Jimmy from Bright Insight was on Joe Rogan. Of course, folks know Jimmy is a big proponent of the Eye of the Sahara in current-day Mauritania being the site of Atlantis. Let's see what he says. Hypothesis prediction. Large sediment displacement slide off the coast of Mauritania conforming to the oceanic displacement mega-scouring depicted in Exhibit K2. Prediction success. The relatively young, 11,000 years before present, and mile-deep Mauritania Slide Complex, MSC, starts some 70 kilometers off the coast of Mauritania and is limited at the shelf edge by a cold water coral reef. In a westerly direction, the MSC follows 300 kilometers a channel levee system that limited the southern edge of the landslide body, so that with an affected area of 30,000 kilometers square and a total volume of 600 plus or minus kilometers cubed, the MSC is one of the largest landslides along the Atlantic continental margins from a study in 2007. So you see what happens here. Huge amount of big landslide, big scouring of the earth, and then this huge underwater slide, kind of like avalanche deposit that happens here. One of the largest landslides along the Atlantic continental margin. Given all this, we are left with a solution for the complete rotation as shown in Exhibit K4 below. We will end this section of the current article and defer the reasons for the specific rotation to our next article in the series, Exothermic Core Mantle Decoupling. I might go through this article. Maybe I should. But we're going to focus on this one for now. Maybe do another series on that one. The complete rotation. So there's some diagrams here of the Earth. You can see the flow that corresponds to the scouring lines that we see, and then the Mauritania Slide Complex in the west. You see other lines that correspond to the flowing of ocean waters across the deserts in Saudi Arabia and down into this peninsula here in Africa. And then, okay, so it's talking about it says complete rotation, assembly of the puzzle comprising the pieces identified in exhibits J, K1, K2, and K3 above. A 6 to 8 hour Euler rotation followed by seas recovering to their new Coriolis influenced locations. This is why there is a 90-degree bend to the west, now south, in the North African flood striations. So that is something that to explain, right? Like if you look at the lines and the striations in Africa, you see a 90-degree bend. And I think when he's saying hours here, he's talking about hours that it took for the Earth to finish this transition. And so as such, you would expect to see some this bend here. And I'll be honest, I am not good enough at sort of math and geometry to totally follow this. I'm just kind of nodding along with this section for now. Surely this would have left traces of oceanic displacement that the ancients would have documented, correct? Indeed, we now investigate a key piece of evidence which serves to confirm the extent and timing of this very cataclysm, an artifact called the Nubian egg. Oh my god, this car alarm will not stop. I really hope this is not showing up on the mic. I'm about to lose my mind. Okay, so look, this is a huge piece of evidence as well, if this is correct. And this is really the last big piece of evidence for the article. Ominous implications of the Nubian ostrich egg, 3800 to 4400 BCE. Artifacts discovered in recent history serve to corroborate the antiquity of both the Giza Pyramids and the receding waters we propose and observe in exhibits I, J, and K above. British archaeologist Malaby Cecil Firth discovered an ancient ostrich egg, dated 5800 to 6400 years ago, in 1907 from inside a tomb from the Nagada Nile River culture. In exhibits L and M below, from a 3D rendering of the Nubian egg posted at Sketchfab, this artifact, known as the Nubian ostrich egg is shown, which arguably depicts the three Giza Pyramids, the Nile River, and the Fayum Basin filled with an elevated sea level of approximately 150 feet, circa 4000 BCE. The reader should also note that the courses, horizontal lines of pyramid construction depicted in these etchings would not have been visible had the pyramids still been covered in their Jura limestone casing stones at the time of observation and sketching. This suggests that the stones were removed by this same inundation. So this ostrich egg that was found, which is often cited as like, was this depicting the pyramids? And mainstream archaeologists, I think for the most part, say no, it's not. But sure looks like it is. It's found nearby where the pyramids are. There's three of them. There's these horizontal lines that look like the courses. And the Ethical Skeptic is saying if the casing stones were still on them, you would not have been able to see these horizontal courses. The receding of the waters in the Fayum Basin, Lake Mora, arguably places the date of the Khafre Khufu erosion inundation as late as 4100 BCE. This is shown in Exhibit M below. Taken in concert with Exhibit L, it becomes unequivocally clear that the Nubian egg depicts the Nile, Red Sea, and the Giza Pyramids 1400 plus years before Egypt's Old Kingdom and the 4th dynasty of Khufu. Here's a quote again from Herodotus in an ancient account of Egypt, 440 BCE. The priests also gave me strong proof concerning this land as follows, namely, that in the reign of King, Maurus, whenever the river reached a height of at least 8 cubits, it watered Egypt below Memphis, and not yet 900 years had gone by since the death of Maurus, when I heard these things from the priests. Now, however, unless the river rises to 16 cubits, or 15 at the least, it does not go over the land. I think, too, that those Egyptians who dwell below the Lake of Maurus, and especially in that region which is called the Delta, if that land continues to grow in height according to this proportion and to increase similarly in extent, will suffer for all remaining time from the Nile not overflowing their land. So what Herodotus is saying is that at the time he was writing this, he had heard from priests in Egypt that, several hundred years before, it took less for the Nile to flood over the land. Basically what he's saying is that the sea levels used to be higher. And the floods that the Egyptians rely on to flood over their land, to water it, to fertilize it, that those waters had been lower and that it takes a higher and higher flood ultimately to make some of these regions habitable that were once habitable. Herodotus describes this as the land being higher, but of course it is the same thing as the sea levels being higher. This right here is a picture of the Nubian ostrich egg. And we can see that there are the pyramids here. There's a depiction of the Nile. I mean, look, the contours of the Nile are dead on. And then the contours of the Red Sea, dead on. And then the position of the pyramids also dead on. So yeah, I think it's pretty undeniable that the Nubian ostrich egg is depicting all of these things. Now, 4000 BCE, when this ostrich egg was dated, let's see. Here's also a picture here of the Fayum Basin. It says still flooded by receding waters. So let me read this here. The Ethical Skeptic's analysis of the Nubian ostrich egg dated 3800 to 4400 BCE. Just as we observed in Exhibit J above, the water levels in the Fayum Valley have retreated over the last 6,400 years into a hypersaline lake called today Lake Maurus, the deepest blue depression area in Exhibit M. This area is filled with karst erosion features, seashells dated to 4600 to 5300 BCE, and ancient aquatic animal bones, including an extensive concentration of younger fossils, to such a degree of preservation that even some stomach contents are intact. The reader may observe how well the Nubian egg depiction fits the ancient topography through clicking on this image, which shows how the Giza Pyramids would have presented an emerging marvel to local inhabitants as the sea level receded past the 220 feet elevation level around 3800 to 4400 BCE. 220 foot elevation sea level Nubian egg depiction. I'm looking at a diagram here. The ocean bay depicted on the Nubian egg So basically what he's saying is that the sea level as depicted on the Nubian eggs correspond to about a 220-foot elevation in the current compared to the current sea level, with the pyramids would have looked amazing as they were probably just jutting out of, the side of the water and stuff not long before then. The top of the Nubian egg, however, reveals not the fabled Atlantis, but something far more profound. So this is the top looking down at the Nubian egg. There are these two concentric circles with a bunch of segments carved into them. Proposed Nubian egg, 5,200-year cycle. A reconstruction of the top of the Nubian egg from a detailed scan reveals not a geographical feature as with the rest of the etchings, but rather a timeline. This offers a compelling explanation about the purpose of the egg itself, as well as the meaning behind these detailed etchings at the very top. Dotted lines indicate inferred dividers. The interval identified curiously matches the 4,200-year Holocene disruption interval identified in Exhibit O2 below. So what he's saying here is that if you add up all these little sections that they have in these circles on the top of the egg, it suggests a 5,200-year cycle of some kind. As shown in Exhibit N1 above, observe that the rings encircling the egg's top, centered around the cutout hole, seem to represent a cyclical timeline. The outer ring is divided into approximately 50 segments, 2 of which are cross-hatched and point directly toward the 3 pyramids of Giza. The inner ring is divided into 44 segments. While interpreted by many researchers as depicting Atlantis, we suggest provisionally that these rings may instead signify an anomaly within a 5,200-year cycle, with the State 1 interval of 4,800 years, outer ring, and State 2 interval anomaly lasting 400 years, an anomaly which the artist poignantly links to the pyramids. Exhibit N2, proposed Nubian egg true polar wandering angle etchings shows the Giza Pyramids 2,000 years before they were supposedly constructed. That's a big point too, by the way. I didn't point this out earlier. If the Nubian egg is actually depicting the pyramids, it would be showing them 2,000 years before they were supposedly constructed. That's the big reason why the mainstream archaeologists say that there's no way it could be depicting them, right? Note that the pyramids are highlighted as being critically involved with the 2 cross-hatched egg timeline segments. The 2 lines struck through the pyramids themselves bear a 104-degree angle between them. For the meaning of State 1 and State 2, as well as the critical significance of the 104-degree celestial angle, refer to Article 3 in our series. It's the next article. At the center, surrounding the hole in the top of the egg, is a circumscribed suggestion of the true polar wander event in question, 104 degrees. Curiously as well, the 2 angled lines struck through the pyramids etched onto the egg bear a 104-degree angle between them. The significance of this 104-degree angle will be demonstrated in our next article, which outlines the implications of this measure inside our ECDO hypothesis. Interestingly, both this period, 5,200 years, as well as the period identified in Exhibit O2 below, 6,443 years, match well with the bottleneck in Y DNA inside humanity, which occurred 5,000 to 7,000 years before present. This chart, courtesy of Ben Davidson, founder of Space Weather News, shows the compression in human population/DNA that occurred at this time, also indicating that the Caucasus and Africa regions were spared, were 100% of the brunt of this calamitous event. Yeah, so I'm probably not going to go into detail here, but there is a big suggestion from studies that a lot of regions of Earth had a massive Y chromosome bottleneck, which I think suggests basically that the vast majority of the people living in these regions were wiped out. Using a data set of 125 Y chromosome sequences from modern humans, Carmen et al. Inferred an intense bottleneck in the Y chromosomes in various geographical regions of the Old World around 5,000 to 7,000 years before present, suggesting a decline in the male effective population size during the Neolithic to approximately 1/20th of its original level before the Neolithic in regions including Africa, Europe, Asia, and the Middle East. So some regions saw a 95% at least destruction, death no breeding going forward of males, 95% of the males. This would explain the wording posed to Herodotus on the part of the priest of Ptah in his work An Account of Egypt, citing 2 events consisting of 4 rising and setting movements. See Herodotus's quote below, which follows below. The cycling between state 1 and state 2 twice would entail 4 total rising and setting changes comprised inside 13,800 years. The astute systems engineer will note that a 2-cycle interval of 12,800 years comprised by a 13,800 year context does not leave much slack time. From Herodotus, quote, thus in the period of 11,340 years, they said that there had arisen no god in human form, nor even before that time or afterwards among the remaining kings who arise in Egypt did they report that anything of that kind had come to pass. In this time they said that the sun had moved 4 times from his accustomed place of rising, and where he now sets he had thence twice had his rising, and in the place from whence he now rises he had twice had his setting. Provisional time construct, non-critical to hypothesis, we postulate the potential existence of an observable harmonic between the great year or precession of the equinoxes and Earth's paleomagnetic/cataclysmic cycle. This concept warrants serious consideration as a principal avenue of investigation within geophysical science. Based on this and other data, we have assembled a candidate timeline for the events postulated in this hypothesis article. While the sequence is a construct and not critical to the hypothesis itself, it represents the author's best guess to date regarding the order of these events in world history. The thesis centers on a series of geomagnetic excursion events shown in exhibits 01 and 02. Blah, 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 blah. 2 points should be noted, however. First, while this timeline suggests a 2030 CE date for the next true polar wander, I am not advocating for anyone to build bunkers or declare the end of the world. Second, the specific years cited here for simplicity of calculation only and should not be interpreted as exact predictions. Applying error tolerance bands to such estimates would merely add a science-y veneer to what is in reality conjecture, a form of pseudoscience. I am not worried about such fodder at this point in the development of a construct pre-hypothesis. So here's a bunch of charts showing world population and events, including things like the meltwater pulses, which Graham Hancock and Randall Carlson talk a lot about, the human male Y chromosome bottleneck, where like 95% of males exit in these regions somehow. A bunch of other events happening here and attributed to different stories and hypotheses. I'm going to skip forward here. From measurements of annual ice layer thickness over the past 15,000 years, the authors find that the Greenland's climate emerging from the last ice age twice shifted from glacial to interglacial conditions over an astonishingly quick 3 to 5 years. It's from Richard Fairbanks in Nature, April 1993. The reader should also take note of these critical elements of observation. The major interval of 6,443-year cataclysms is exactly 1/4 of the great year precession of the equinoxes, or 25,772 years at Earth's current rate of precession. The minor interval of 5,200 years for sub-periods of the Holocene is 1/4 of the low end of precession of the equinoxes variance, 20,800 to 25,772 years. This also matches the etchings made on the Nubian egg, an exhibit N1 dated to 3850 BCE. The Bowling Allerod 6 degrees C rapid warming event around 12,700 BCE rose 7.5 times faster than is our current rate of climate warming. An epilogue in exothermic Zanibekov redistribution. Nonetheless, this substantial body of evidence has been largely overlooked due to fake skepticism and an indignant overreaction against the often flawed or biased Noah's flood research of previous centuries. A straw man fallacy is at play. If one cites even a regional inundation, they must be promoting the biblical flood and creationism. This is simply ignorance in action from both extremist camps, leaving those of us caught in the middle weary. We contend that there is a stronger argument now at play, a Holmesian deductive one. Species of Holmesian deduction far more powerful than mere statistical suggestive or inductive evidence. White crow, a specific element of evidence falsifies prevailing theory A while simultaneously proving antithetical or competing alternative B. Dead body, a specific element of evidence falsifies prevailing theory A, which establishes necessity for a non-specific alternative to theory A. Going back to what he said at the beginning, if I find a dead body in the living room immediately after a party, it doesn't matter how many expert attendees testify that the party went fine. The dead body proves otherwise. Coffray's erosion marks and base subterranean chamber limestone reconcretions constitute a dead body. Occam's razor has been surpassed. Aside from the examples of professional buffoonery we outlined above, the only reason such obvious dead body evidence would be ignored is if it introduces a history that threatens the religious fervor of antediluvialism. Hence the strident levels of strawman and ignoratio elenchi surrounding this topic. Watch patiently over the coming years. You will find that denial of this more reasonable version of Earth's cataclysmic history is a common theme behind most enforced historical and archaeological narrative. Be especially cautious of appeals to acceptance, the assertion that because one theory is generally accepted, no evidence exists for any alternative theories. I find it curious that whatever the mechanism is that caused this rise in sea level, it appears to be cyclic as opposed to chaotic in nature, much as if the LLVP structures of the inner mantle serve to impart a Zenebekov effect in the Earth's rotation given sufficient mass distribution. In other words, aside from an initial quick surge of maybe 1,500 to 2,200 feet, the oceans in this case settled at a specific height, 576 feet above sea level and 312 feet up the pyramid height, stayed there for some amount of time, and then returned more gradually to their current context in a machine-like manner. The only global scale mechanism I can think of which would cause such an iron oxide-infused surge, overlain upon a normal curve in sea level retreat, to the necessary exclusion of plate tectonics and celestial interlopers, is the mechanics of Earth's rotation, an effect generated by a chaotic Earth's core, perhaps. Is it possible that the reason Earth took 800 million years to host a comprehensively advanced civilization from more complex forms of eukaryote life is that the Earth tends to topple every so often, setting things back significantly? This could render our planet semi-stable, as opposed to our assumed stable planetary profile, a garden paradise with one essential disqualifying flaw. Perhaps this made our planetary resource ideal to serve as a genetic farm, where the stress of mass extinction spurred further and more aggressive speciation, but it remained unsuited for permanent large-scale habitation by higher-order beings, unless they were fleeing as outlaws. Good thoughts. Owing to the pervasive influence of narrow-minded skepticism and a rigidly controlled narrative, humanity often finds itself disconnected from a true comprehension of its own nature and origins. The dating and age of the pyramids at Giza appear to play a pivotal role in unraveling the obscure chapters of human history. Consequently, these insights seem to have been deliberately omitted from our collective understanding by authoritative entities. Had it not been for the distinct erosion patterns on the Khafre pyramid, I might have readily accepted the official narrative, relegating theories of an older pyramid age to the realm of mere speculation. However, my trust lies more firmly in my own ability to identify corruption, to infer and deduce, and to unravel mysteries, than in those who craft and uphold prevailing dogma. The reluctance of scientists to perform carbon-14 testing on the seemingly overcooked red ochre paint within the Khufu Pyramid's relieving chambers raises significant suspicions. This hesitance regarding something so important, yet so straightforward, strikes me as a telling indicator of underlying malice. I am not inclined to immediately conclude this inundation and biblical flood are one and the same. I'm not ruling that out, certainly, but we need a lot more information first. However, I also find it hard to believe that a flood of such magnitude, as evidenced by these undeniable erosion patterns, could have occurred within the last 4,500 years without being more prominently recorded in history, beyond the account of Noah's flood or the Sumerian epic of Utanapishtim. It seems more plausible that this event took place far earlier than our documented history, or what has been permitted to be recorded. This leads to a necessary questioning of the inductive science that supports the prevailing narrative. Indeed, none of these scientific interpretations appear to be as compelling as the natural tapestry evidently plainly set before us. Every day brings us closer. Every night my soul sees a troubled mankind suffering blindly. So let the traces linger on. Many years have come and gone. Oh, how lonely man has been without a trace of the traceless friend. It's from the Seals and Crofts of the Euphrates. While I do not claim to hold the definitive answers regarding the architects or the underlying purposes of these enigmatic structures, one thing seems increasingly clear. Significant secrets have been obscured, lost not only in the realms of ancient engineering, but also in the deeper rendering of humanity's origins. These pyramids, standing as silent witnesses to a forgotten epic, challenge us to look beyond accepted narratives, urging us to rediscover and reconnect with lost chapters of our collective and, yes, spiritual past. In their enduring mystery, they remind us as skeptics that history is not just a record of what we know, but a testament to the vast expanse of what we have yet to understand, along with the responsibility to resist agency and winnow the unknown. And that's it. That's the article. Wow, we've covered a lot of ground here. So if the ethical skeptic is right, then the earth flips sometimes. The oceans move, civilizations are set back, some are wiped out, humanity is brought back down to its knees again to rebuild. What does all this mean for us? Is this true? I don't know. I think in future articles I will go through his exothermic core mantle decoupling ECDO hypothesis in more depth. He posted that in May 2024. I have some other videos and articles that I'm going to go through that approach some of these topics from different angles. And hopefully the synthesis of all this will either make these theories seem silly and obviously false, or not silly at all, deadly serious. And I don't know what it means. If you've hung with me, thank you. I hope that you found this interesting and not too terribly dry. I'm going to post some more videos on this subject, probably shorter ones for audiences that don't want to sit through hours of reading. And many more content pieces to come. So thank you so much.